This is TWiT.
All right, so I promised that we'd kind of take a look at the 7 insights of network theory, and this is, obviously you spell out in much further detail throughout the book, kind of broadening these ideas out. But you listed them. It makes it kind of easy to dive in and get a general sense of what people will find inside the book. So I thought we'd go through those. First of all, you say no man is an island. And this seems to kind of relate to the importance, and you were just talking about this a few minutes ago, the importance of specific nodes within a network, or, I don't know, is this the holy grail of how influence works when you're talking about networks? Is that what you're talking about here?
Yes, we're all connected. It's pretty hard in this day and age to be a network isolate, to be a node with no edges.
Right.
And to an extent that is extraordinary, our connections define who we are. If Facebook only knows your network of friends, but knows nothing about you, in fact, it knows everything about you. So this idea that we are how we're networked is a very central idea, not just for our time, but actually, I think it's true universally. It's really the human condition that we are connected, and those connections in some measure define us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then you also mentioned a little bit ago, birds of a feather flock together, homophily, in other words. You say in your book that might actually be the first law of social networks. How would you say this has affected our modern social networks most? I mean, I feel like I see this every day. I feel like this is very obvious when and based on the networks, it's obvious in different ways. You get more of this on Twitter in a certain fashion, and you get a totally different type of this on Facebook. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, there's some great research based on the data generated by these platforms showing how this process of ideological polarization in our time works. I'll give you one example that relates to Twitter. If you look at political Twitter, people who are most likely to tweet about political issues are on the edges of the political spectrum. The further you are out to the left or to the right, the more likely you are to use Twitter for political statements. Secondly, your tweet is much more likely to be retweeted by somebody in your ideological cluster. So conservatives retweet conservatives and liberals retweet liberals. And thirdly, your tweet is 20% more likely to be retweeted for every moral or emotive word that you put in it. Now, moral or emotive is academic speak for strong language. And anybody who spent any time on Twitter will know that there is a premium on strong language. The left tends to use the F word a lot, but the right uses strong language in its own way. And this means that Twitter is an engine, not just for fake news, actually more for extreme views. Extreme views go over well on Twitter. If you mapped, just a few years ago when everybody was blogging like mad, if you mapped the blogosphere, you found the same thing, that there were two great clusters, one liberal and one conservative, and they linked to one another. So that the center ground is strangely empty. This seems to be one of the defining characteristics of the networked age. And as the studies pile up, it begins to become clear that we've created engines for polarization, that in some ways the network platforms make this worse because the ways in which, for example, the news feed is configured, or at least the way it was configured, we're still waiting to see how the tweaks change it. The way it was configured tended to send a kind of steady stream of confirming information. You saw more of what you liked. Now, if you keep seeing more of what you like and less of what you don't like, you are trapped in a kind of cycle of confirmation bias. It's unlikely that your position will, in fact, hold steady. You'll tend to drift further out in the direction that you started in, whether to the left or to the right. So I think nearly all the network platforms have an inherent tendency to polarize, to drive people out along the political spectrum by giving them more of what they've liked, more of what they've engaged with. And that means that they're not challenged as much with counter arguments, with things that challenge their assumptions. Remember, what keeps people in the center ground, by and large, politically, is having their assumptions challenged, is being caused to doubt the truth of something that they've previously believed. Well, online networks make that happen less and less, and that seems to be a fundamental structural problem, given we are innately inclined to self-segregate.
Yeah, and we feel like we have a lot of control over what we are presented, and in some ways we do, but in other ways, as you point out throughout the book, the networks themselves have the ability to determine how we connect and how those relationships are fostered. And so that becomes a danger in and of itself. You also mentioned in here, connected to this topic, the difficulty in determining kind of what the connective tissue is that links an actual relationship. We know that people can flock this way or that way, but what is actually determining what the actual connective tissue is between that pairing can be a little difficult. I guess that's one key component that networks like Facebook are really scrambling to try and figure out, because if they master that, then they're able to keep people longer, get more people in, because people are finding exactly what they're looking for, I suppose.
Right, and since the primary motive is to enhance user engagement, you are looking for things that are sticky. You're looking for content that's engaging. You also want, of course, new nodes to keep attaching to the network. The network must grow. Metcalfe's law says that network's worth more for every additional node. Bigger is better. And there are increasing returns to scale in network economics. So that's another thing that's important. The network must grow. And how do you get it to grow? Well, you need to get people to feel, I'm missing out. If I don't get myself a Facebook account, I'm going to miss out on what my friends or my family are doing. So this is another incentive that drives the network platforms.
Yeah, Facebook's done a really good job of making it so that if you step away, it's really hard to stay away.
2 billion plus users is an astonishing achievement. That's a bigger population than the population of China, the most populous nation on earth, and it's still growing.
Yeah,
and penetration is extraordinarily high in developed countries, but growing fast in less developed countries. So we are in the presence of an amazing phenomenon. And I don't want to sound like a Luddite. In many ways, I'm lost in admiration when I contemplate the career of Mark Zuckerberg, or for that matter, the careers of the people before him who built Amazon, in the case of Jeff Bezos. These are incredible business achievements, and one shouldn't knock them. But one needs to recognize that when the people building the network said everything will be awesome when we're all connected, they had self-interest reasons for making that argument. And we were all, I think, a little uncritical about it. I know myself that in the early days of the online networks, I was quite uncritical about what was happening, and probably drank the Kool-Aid for a while, thinking, well, perhaps if everybody's connected, the world will be a better place. And then I realized came to realize how naive that was. Let me illustrate that with an argument from the book. When the Reformation happened back in the 16th century, 501 years ago, it was possible because of the printing press, which essentially was the internet of the 16th century, and allowed ideas to spread much faster than had been possible before you could print books, when you had to copy everything out by hand. So this is a very important analogy for us. Luther, who started the whole Reformation, thought that if everybody could be connected, if they could all read the Bible themselves in their own language and have a direct relationship with God, not necessarily mediated by a corrupt church, everything would be awesome. That was his sincere belief. But what happened? Well, what happened was 130 years of religious conflict, because two clusters formed: the cluster of people who agreed with Luther, except they thought he should go a bit further, and the cluster of people who thought he should be burnt at the stake as a heretic. The way in which the printing press worked was not to create the priesthood of all believers, which was Luther's version of Mark Zuckerberg's global community. The way the printing press worked was to allow Europe to divide into two rival armies. And this war of religion raged for over a century. That's a very clear warning to us that the process of polarization can go further, and verbal violence can lead to actual violence. I think we've underestimated that risk because we haven't seen that lesson from history, even although it seems to me to be screaming, look at me. This is a version of your reality. And it's happened before. It was slower. I would say our experience is an order of magnitude faster than the experience of the 16th and 17th centuries. What took 100 years then has taken 10 years now. But it's the same familiar process of polarization, verbal violence leading to actual violence, crazy stuff going viral, and we haven't paid enough attention to that.